Coogs House. The Houston Cougars are at home on Saturday night, and I think they've got a chance to win a football game.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen. They appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day. If you enjoy the conversation, but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below if in your household you consider cereal a soup. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. All kinds of fun stuff going on with FanDuel. We'll talk more about that later in the show, but fun time to be a football fan on FanDuel. We got to talk about the stakes of the game this weekend. It's a couple of football teams without a whole lot of wins, trying to find something, and there are things to play for in this football game. I got my expectations. I want to talk through that with you a little bit after doing some research on Utah this week and talking to JT, DMing a couple other guys and stuff like that. I got some thoughts on this game. But first and foremost, I got to talk about how Houston can and should win this football game. Because, again, it's Friday. I've always talked myself into a win by Friday of the Houston Cougars football, that the Houston Cougars football team will win a game by Friday. I just talked myself into it. And there are three things Houston's got to do, the three keys to victory for this particular week. First, they got to strike early. More on that in a second. But second, they have to use Zeon Chriss as a true dual threat quarterback. Explain that in a second. And last but not least, the defense has to rebound, has to come back off that Kansas one, be the defense we know they are, and win the takeaway battle. Now, I mentioned that Houston's got to strike early. Striking early puts pressure on a Utah offense that is sputtering. I mean, abysmal. They lost 13-7 to TCU just last week. In large part, that's because they have a seventh year this year, I guess, quarterback go down to injury in Cam Rising and had no real backup plan. His backup was a true freshman that was a good recruit in Isaac Wilson, was not slotted to start in the immediate future. They've also I guess technically he resigned. Their offensive coordinator technically resigned, was not fired. We talked about that earlier this week some. But when under pressure to throw the football, bluntly, Isaac Wilson's just not ready for it yet. And that's the nicest way I can put it. He's a 50% completion guy. And for all the things that people have said gnarly about some different Houston quarterbacks the last couple of years, that's like 15 or more percentage points worse in completions than anyone Houston's trotted out there since this show has been a show, right? That's remarkably bad. His touchdown to interception ratio is 7 touchdowns to 8 picks, has 3 multi-interception games this year. He did have 280 yards passing against Arizona. However, he also has had games down closer to 100. He had 239 versus Utah State, and that's like the big highlight game. The big deal here, though, was against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State OSU is in my notes. He had 207 yards passing, and they were able to stay pretty balanced, had a really good game running the football because they came out and blitzed Oklahoma State early, and didn't have to get thrown off track. If Houston strikes early, strikes fast, makes them one-dimensional, Isaac Wilson flat can't do it. Get a couple touchdowns in the game, watch him crumble. To do that, Zeon Chriss has to be a true dual threat quarterback. Houston's Zeon Chriss had an electric TCU game. Came out, had a decent start throwing the football, and then he struggled in his 3 drives against Kansas. TCU had to take guys out of coverage to account for him in the run game. Frankly, one of the biggest plays of that game is his 71-yard touchdown run, in which they did not account for him in the run game. If you go back and check that play out, Houston lines up really wide at their wide receivers. Guys move out there with them. It's a cover 2 looks. The safeties are split across the top. It's an easy, I should say it's an even coverage look. It might have dropped to 4 or whatever, but the safety split across the top. There's a wide open middle of the field. They ran a fold play inside for the quarterback to take off on the power type draw. I say power type draw because he pump faked like a pass, but the blocking was very much run blocking. But that's in the minutia in the weeds there. And he takes off running and splits the middle of the guys. It's with the famous like almost 22 miles an hour or whatever, right? Super crazy fast. Because he had that capability, you saw TCU have to run kind of not ideal defenses, have more guys committed to the middle of the field and the box to prevent Zeon Chriss from ever running. And frankly, for what it's worth, they stuck in that as Donovan Smith drove the ball down the field later in that game. And Donovan Smith kind of benefits, right, from Zeon's impact. Donovan came into Houston as a runner at Tech, but has not been that, right? And so we really need that aspect of Zeon Chris's game. Kansas, right, for whatever it's worth, kind of said, like, let's see what he does. And then, honestly, Kansas has been really bad against scrambling quarterbacks, but Zeon Chriss underperformed in his 3 drives in that game before coming out hurt. Now, when that hamstring injury happened is kind of murky. And bluntly, if he went out there for a drive trying to play on it, because after 2 drives, he came off and got in the blue injury tent and came back out, played one more drive, and then went to the sideline and had his helmet on and everyone back in the football game. If that blue tent trip or earlier was the hamstring injury, it's safe to say that that would obviously limit what he can do, because Kansas was, unfortunately, and Houston did not take advantage, super susceptible to quarterback run stuff. That kind of been their kryptonite throughout the season thus far. It's not that Utah is as bad as that on defense. Utah is a better defensive team than Kansas, as daunting as they may sound right this second. It's that if Zeon Chriss can do both of these things, no defense can cover the 5 guys that are skill positions and the quarterback as a separate threat, right? There's not a sound fundamental football defense that does a lot to spy the quarterback. You pull guys out of coverage or vice versa, right? At some point, you got to have guys that win matchups. And I think Houston's got some guys that can win matchups if they have the chance there, right? Whether it's Manjack or Devin Williams winning their outside spots, Rashawn Sanford winning against a down safety because the linebacker's going to stay in and play the quarterback, right? Whatever happens there, I think something's going to work in Houston's favor if Utah has to adjust to Zeon Chriss running the football. Last but not least, and I think this is last on my list of 3 here because I'm the most confident in it. The defense has to rebound. The defense has been the backbone, the support system for this team that has kept games as close as they've been, frankly, to this point. Again, we talk about Iowa State being a 3-point game late in the third quarter. We talk about Oklahoma being a close game, right? We talk about, frankly, except for like the first half against UNLV, them playing pretty strong against that go-go offense, right? TCU, right? The defense played phenomenal, had a bunch of takeaways. The defense has to go back to being that this week. Isaac Wilson will give them a great chance to do that. I think that works in our benefit. They also, though, need to win the takeover battle. Part of that TCU game, part of the magic there is TCU turned the football over. Houston had 3 fumbles that they fell on, and Houston did not turn the ball over because of that, right? Kansas threw 1,000 interceptions, or at least it felt like that. And in this game, Houston's got to win that turnover battle because the defense plays well, right? So that means that, it's college football. A fumble or pick will happen when Houston's in. They're not elite yet. They're rebuilding, or yada, yada, yada. The defense has to get a couple. And the thing that I feel good about is that Utah's had multiple games with multiple multiple turnovers. Isaac Wilson's had multiple on his own in 3 different games. He's only started 6 games, right? Or he only played in 6 games. He only started in 4. So this is not unheard of that he would just throw that to the wrong team, whether it's McCutcheon or Wilson or Halsey in the back end, or just Cooper knocking him out, right? Whatever happens with that, I think the defense has to rebound. Now, I've got expectations in this game, if you can't tell, and what I think will happen. And I'd like to talk with you about those. But before I get too far down the list here, I got to talk about our newest buddy, ZBiotics. Because this weekend, you're probably planning on having a good time. And ZBiotics pre-alcoholic probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink alcohol, it gets converted into these toxic byproducts in your gut. It's the byproduct, not dehydration. This is interesting science for me to learn. That's what you blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to help break down that byproduct. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best the next day. Again, it's 3 steps. Drink the pre-alcohol, drink responsibly, enjoy the next day. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. ZBiotics is backed 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for whatever reason, they'll refund the money with no questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege for 15% off at checkout. Also, want to tell you a little bit about our buddies over at Prize Picks. Now, Prize Picks is the best place to get real money on sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. All. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. You can run your game all season long. Right now, if you want to play Prize Picks alongside Drewski, Joe Budden, MMA champ Sean O'Malley, any of these celebrities got all kinds of people out there, you can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries with some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even have to win to receive $50 in bonus prizes. It's guaranteed. If you want to make the best way to win money this football season, it's going to be Prize Picks. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions. I see your comments. I know you've got them. Turn those into money all season long with Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 off. To get $50 back in your pocket instantly after your first $5. Again, that's download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first line. Prize Picks. Run your game. Parker Andrew, Locked On Coogs here, looking at this weekend's matchup with Utah. And yes, I do have expectations in this game. I think it's interesting to look at a team that's 2-4. People think, well, Parker, why are you so dead set on 2-5 actually? And why are you so dead set on having expectations in this game? Utah is atrociously bad, and that absolutely factors into this, right? But what I think is going to happen here is both defenses are going to play well. And what's interesting is that both defenses playing well is going to get exacerbated by the offenses making them look even better. Houston's had their struggles this year on offense. So whether it's gelling with the Kevin Parvay play calling, the occasional run on 3rd and 12, which we'll spend a long time in the offseason talking about X's and O's and things like that. But I don't know what those are. Those are going to make defenses look good, though, right? Both these defenses are going to look good and probably look better than they actually are because of those kinds of things. Because much like Houston runs those kind of questionable things, Utah's got a new OC putting in, and he's a career offensive coordinator. I'm not saying that their guys never called a play before. It's interesting to have a career offensive play caller as an analyst ready to take on this job. But he hasn't called this offense. He's spent a few months in this terminology, but it's a little different, right? And so ultimately, they'll have their hiccups on offense too. True freshman quarterback, obviously, is going to lead to some of those as well. Now, if I look at what I think happens in this game as far as the score goes, my expectation there is I think 17 points wins the football game. I almost would definitively say first team to 20 points will win the football game, right? It's just a low-scoring affair. Both offenses sputtered throughout the year. And like I said, last week, TCU beat Utah 13-7. that combines to 20 points. You're darn right, 20 points would win that football game, right? Those kinds of football games. And so it feels like that kind of a low scoring affair. And from a vibe perspective, what I'm expecting is kind of like when Houston played UTSA, was that 14 months ago now, the start of the 2023 season. That was the Blues game, right? They wore the Lovey Coug Blues. And the big deal there was it felt like both teams had explosive players on offense and no one could get it going. And that felt very much like a first game of the year, right? There's no preseason games in college football or anything like that. And that was part of the drudgery or the stuck in the mudness of the offenses in those games. Ultimately, Houston, without an offensive coordinator, never really got out of that. We talked ad nauseam about that, but that was never a good decision. This is going to feel like that, in that there are players on both offenses that you're going to feel like ought to be performing better than they are, but there's just something in the mud as far as like something holding everyone back here. With Houston, I think it's just getting over that hump. It's the first year of this rebuild. Zeon Chriss is in his first year in power conference football. And the Utah defense, yes, they lost Cam Rising on offense. The Utah defense is good, right? And so there'll be struggles there. They're on the inverse, right? I think Houston's got pros across a couple different spots in the defense. Keith Cooper being the most clear-cut name to me that I think's got a real shot to play on Sundays. And he's the closest one of those guys to true freshman quarterback Isaac Wilson. I think that factors in to be kind of a stick in the mud kind of deal where it's just going to be hard for them to get over that pressure. I think Keith Cooper has a big day here. If I'm Sheil Wood or Willie Fritz, I'm trying to find ways to scheme him into one-on-one pass rush scenarios because freshmen are known to panic when those kind of things collapse. Isaac Wilson bluntly has at different points this season as well. I also think part of this will be part of my favoring of Houston in this, and I'll get to my score in a second, is that it is, for all the flaws of this season and all the people that show up just for wins and stuff like that, it is homecoming that works in their favor. It is also, for what it's worth, the day before Houston Cougar basketball really starts in earnest. Houston plays Texas A&M in a charity basketball exhibition on Sunday, and not that I'm making it, but I will say there are people that are making it to town for homecoming and tying that into their trip. That's pulling that. I mean, that's successive programs helping other programs. People are making the trip down to Houston for that, making their weekend carved out around Houston Cougar athletics for all of that. I think that's going to add into the crowd factor too. Game Time is the best place to buy tickets for these kinds of things. They're not a sponsor of today's show, of today's episode, but they're a sponsor of Locked On. I saw groups of 4 lower bowl tickets going for $28 a seat, all in pricing. That means, like, with all the fees and everything put together, $28 a seat. At some level, I think that'll help steer people to this as well. It's not a high cost of entry, obviously, by any stretch, to get into a football game. And so all that is to say, I think that all leads to Houston winning this game 17-14. Again, really low scoring, and I know that that's not what people want to see. I do think that part of that low scoring, though, will be because the defenses are playing well. I don't think it's just going to be a kind of low scoring, ugly offense game. The defense will be making plays and turnovers and stuff like that as well. When I talked with JT yesterday, I feel like Houston gets a defensive touchdown this game. Frankly, for how good the defense has been in so many categories, forcing turnovers has been kind of uniquely low for defenses ranked as high as them in a couple other areas. And it's kind of time for them to get one of those big ones where you go back and get some points out of it. So I'd expect 17-14-ish. I think Houston does it because I think they frankly jump out early, and then eventually Isaac Wilson throws one in the end zone. But along the way there, I think he turns it over a couple times. That's my thought on what happens in this game. But regardless of what I think is going to happen, there are some high stakes attached to this one. And I want to talk about that in a moment. But we mentioned that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports, because NFL fans can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Whenever you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats. If you like play-by-play and so much more on the exact same page, you place your bets. And now you can start with $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Listen, when I say when you place your first $5 bet, you get $200 back in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. Right now, as they're recording this podcast, and this has moved some this week, Utah is favored by 3.5 points. Obviously, I'm taking the Cougs there. The over-under is probably more interesting. It's moved down to 36.5 over-under. And if you have not inferred from listening thus far, I still think I'm taking the under. But whatever you think, go to FanDuel.com, America's number one sports book today. Parker Ainsworth, Locked on Coogs. Talking about Utah and the Utes coming down to Houston for homecoming this weekend and what is at stake in this segment with Utah and Houston. Now, it's weird to talk about stakes with two teams that, frankly, I guess technically, mathematically are not eliminated from bowl season, but in all actuality feel very removed from being a bowl team. Utah is down bad. The stakes for them they are spiraling. 3 straight losses. The rivalry with BYU next week is called the Holy War, and BYU is undefeated this season and atop the Big 12 conference. They're looking for, if anything, just like a I don't know, a feel good, a participation ribbon, something to feel good about the program right now. If you're not a social media person, hats off on being more diligent about your mental health than some of us. But I will say that if you just interact with Big 12 social media, Utah thought they were coming in to run away with this conference. It felt like you had Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and Tyreek Hill coming into the Big 12 to run through the whole thing. And Utah has now lost 3 straight conference games and will lose more. I think they won't lose this weekend. They're going to lose more very soon, right? Utah came in talking about the Pac-12 this, the Pac-12 this, and then they lost a couple of Arizona teams and felt good. Oh, those are just the Arizona teams. They're the Pac-12, the real Big 12, da-da-da. And then TCU beat them and only needed 13 points to do it. Overall, the Utah experience in the Big 12 has been both embarrassing and eye-opening. But as far as this game and these stakes go, they've got to find a way to turn their program around. This is bigger than internet trash talk. This is Utah trying to find something to gleam on from this experience. And frankly, something to gleam on from Isaac Wilson and a bigger picture, right? Another stake for this game for Utah is that this is all turning out to be a, big, gigantic tryout for Isaac Wilson. And if he ain't the dude or does not look like he can be the dude by next fall, they're talking to Cam Rising about an 8th year. They're talking to portal kind of guys to come in and play behind them. They've got to figure something out because regardless of where they think Isaac Wilson is in a couple of years, they have to figure this out by next fall. And it feels like this Isaac Wilson thing won't be ready by then, right? Now, as far as Houston goes, the stakes for Houston this weekend are to rebound. You struggled with Kansas, kind of letting the air out of tires, and finding yourself against TCU means nothing at this point because after a bye week and 2 weeks to prepare for a 1-5 Kansas team, it all went out the window. Very literally, right? It's windy up there. And so that is to say that Houston stakes are to kind of point out that, Kansas is the outlier. The defense is the defense. The defense, Jalen Daniels and Kansas were different. They made some spectacular plays. Houston gave them the ball several times. There were several extra times, right? Like at some point, that'll have to factor in as well. You also have to respond with the offense and say, listen, Zeon Chriss, when he's healthy, this offense can show progress, right? Because progress has been anything but linear for Houston this season. You have a good showing against Oklahoma. You beat Rice. You show them the Big 12 with a couple duds against Cincinnati and Iowa State, right? Iowa State, you played tight throughout the first 3 quarters and then collapse, touchdown, fumble, touchdown, it's over, right? You beat TCU, come back and can't beat Kansas. That up and down is not sustainable for in a very metaphorical but also literal sense. I don't think they'll let. Fritz has a couple years thing to get this thing turned around, but they won't let a bunch of people stay on staff if it keeps going like that. Their job is to make sure it goes steady, right? Houston's got to find some way to build off of whatever momentum they can steal back from that TCU game a couple years ago. Use the crowd to get back into this. Now, in proving that that was not all fool's gold, right? That TCU is closer to where this team is, not Kansas, right? That also means that you're proving that Zeon Chriss is a guy that can lead your football team this fall. You got big time recruits coming in the next couple of years. Austin Carlisle, class 2025, is a big-time quarterback, will make an impact on this football program. Keyshawn Henderson's the top athlete in the country in the number 1 player in the state of Texas in 2026. He's coming to Houston because Houston's told him he can play quarterback, right? That's in the future. If Zeon wants to compete and, take the starting job while those guys learn from behind him, he's only got a few more games left to prove it. And I'm not saying he can't do it. He's got some physical tools. And again, there were moments in the TCU game where it's like, man, I wish we'd had this guy all year, right? However, he's got to prove that he can as well. And that is all to say that there are high stakes attached to this game, as weird as it is to think about 2 bad football teams playing a high stakes game. Fan bases know when they look at these teams that this year is not the goal for either program. This year is setting things up. And sometimes the setup is where major things get decided. Anyway, it's a fun weekend of Houston Cougars sports. Coming at you a couple times each day here for a while. Love talking Houston Cougar football in the mornings, but we'll be talking Houston Cougar basketball this afternoon as well. So make sure you check that out. If you're looking for a second listen for the meantime or something else to listen to from the Locked On Podcast Network, I'm going to recommend Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll's both entertaining, and he does a great job of covering the conference from top to bottom. He is a Baylor alum, so I shouldn't give him maybe it's more reason to give him a hard time. He's really focused on this like Baylor ticketing situation they got going on where different seats are wearing different colors, so it's not organized. Let's just say, well, we could all complain about marketing this and marketing that. That's a disaster over there. So at least Houston is not that. If you want to find me to talk about Houston Cougar football, basketball, or anything going on with Houston sports, find me at Painsworth512 on Twitter, Instagram, whatever. Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on those kind of things as well. So find me wherever. Locked On Cougs is a prime member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.